Welcome back to New Persuasive Words. I'm Scott Jones.
And I'm Bill Bohr.
And Bill, I was just thinking of something this morning. It's a great quote from Mr. Dante Alighieri. The hottest places in hell are reserved for those who in times of great moral crisis maintain their neutrality. You've been known to say that, Dante's view of hell gives you a little twinkle in your eye.
Yeah, no, it would be, I mean, I think Milton's hell might be more theologically correct, but
no, Milton's trying to make hell great again. I don't want my
no, that's a 19th century reading of Milton.
I think
that's a bad reading of Milton.
No, you know what? Milton does show up in a very nice way in the Space Seed. When they get rid of Khan in that Star Trek episode, and they're at the end, they're like Mr. Spock cannot get over the fact that Scotty and McCoy and Kirk seem to have this sneaking admiration for Khan, and they start. Well, Khan and Kirk have this exchange about Milton. He says, "Have you read your Milton, Captain?" Because they're going to exile him to this, planet. Right. So, well, Bill, I've been taking Jordan Peterson's advice.
Okay. Right. And
well, Jordan Peterson says whenever he sees a client for any purpose, he asks what they eat for breakfast. And he says that one of the problems in our culture is we eat a lot of sugar, which evolutionarily is not good for us. That really that protein, fat, the traditional sort of bacon and eggs, sausage, that's what you should eat for breakfast. That calms the human body. It basically just gets the human body, it gets the sort of central nervous system and your metabolism in a state that say, okay, we're not going to starve in the next couple hours. And then you can calm down. Whereas if you eat like a croissant and espresso and stuff, or a macchiato or whatever, with lots of sugar and these sorts of things, it will make you, nervous. It'll quickly metabolize and your body gets nervous and you're wired and you're acting like everybody in Philadelphia and New York. But that being said, it is National Popcorn Day, Bill. So I did get a $5 bucket of popcorn.
Very nice.
That sound is me crunching on National Popcorn Day for our listeners.
Very good.
Negating my virtuous Petersonian breakfast with salt and butter and
you got corn.
Corn is good. Which a lot of Iowa farmers subsidies are going to that. And Bill, I learned this on NPR this morning. Like 100 years ago, you couldn't bring popcorn into the theaters. That this was considered verboten. That theaters were high-end establishments, and popcorn was a street food that was viewed as sort of pedestrian and something that had no place in the movie theater. And eventually, now it carries concessions are what make the thing go. So I walked in, there was no movie I wanted to see, but I found a tub, and they'll fill any tub for $5. So
very nice.
Today it's Cinemark Theater. So our listeners and our viewers, if you're watching us right now, eat a little popcorn. If you're listening to us, throw a little Orville Redenbacher in the microwave. Kick back, because you might learn something. You might laugh. All sorts of things happen. We had an episode that I thought was pretty fun on Monday, and then we've stayed quiet. We've stayed quiet this week. We've been in the weeds, on the wall.
Been busy working, And by the way, who I would have loved to go on a movie with? Anthony Bourdain.
Yes, I would have done anything
with him, right? But what the food he brought was a doner kebab. I think I remember the episode, which those are awesome. So we went to a German movie with all kinds of great food to eat. Yeah. So you've sent me a few things. Are we going to talk about those, or if there's a whole new thing going on with you? I don't.
Bill, who knows what we'll talk about today? We talk about. I watched I watched and listened to. I actually watched the video. I listened to. I listened to it twice, I think. Jon Stewart's podcast with John Meacham, the great John Meacham.
Yeah, I like a lot.
One of the best, maybe the best presidential historian, popular historian, Doris Kearns Goodwin.
Popular,
popular, not an academic, but popular.
He is an academic. He's at Vanderbilt. Yeah, I think I think he's an interesting read. Yeah, I think there are better
Doris
historians.
Kearns Goodwin,
She's okay. I mean, I've read
Eric
John,
Metaxas.
Ron White. Did you know who Ron? Yeah, Metaxas.
What about Bill O'Reilly
All
killing
right. We're
killing
going down.
Kennedy?
I write down Ron White, who I had as a class in Fuller, but he was at University of San Francisco. I just read his biography on Lincoln is exceptional. He just read a great biography on Ulysses S. Grant, which made me rethink that figure. So anyway, but nonetheless, John Meacham.
Didn't they say when some of the attachés went to Lincoln and said Grant's a drunk, he said, well, then send him all my generals a case of whatever Grant's drinking.
Which, by the way, that was fake news. That was one of those propaganda things tried to defame him. But anyway, so yes, John Meacham, who I think is a wonderful public intellectual. I think he's maybe one of the best public historical intellectuals that are out there. So I mean, that's a compliment. I don't want to take anything away from that. Yeah.
So he was on with Jon Stewart, of course, and Jon Stewart described him as, I often describe you, Bill Bohr, a bon vivant. I say that all the time. I say, I just did a podcast with my bon vivant, Bill Bohr. And many, you're called that many times. You're called many things.
I'm called many things, absolutely.
By the fans, Bill.
By the fan base, yes.
This, and we get mail, we get all sorts of, I mean, some people really think you were involved in the DNC machinations to get Kamala. I mean, people really, you get mentioned in a lot. You are a major player, and you're like George Soros, but without all the money.
Right. Well, yeah. Here in my power base up on this side of a mountain in Vermont. Yeah. Although I did get a great compliment today after my sermon. A number of my members came up to me and she goes, I wasn't going to come today, but I'm glad I did. I come here and he's like, you rip my guts out and then put them back in a different way. To which I said, well, I guess it's good that I did not become a doctor like my mother wanted.
You could have been at the 4077.
Yeah. So back to Jon Stewart and John Meacham, right?
Yeah, so it's pretty interesting, and I mean, I'll put a link to the podcast in.
Yeah, it's really
because it's well worth watching in its entirety.
Entertaining,
very informative, and Meacham's gloss on history. Just so many things that he says, which are great, like his sense of his way of describing what the founders did, and how the founders basically set a high mark in world history for liberty, but then sort of hypocritically, we're out of compliance with it until post-Civil War. He said, then we were in compliance for 10 years, right? And Reconstruction, and then not until the 60s, right? And Meacham said something very interesting. He said, the country we live in right now, the United States of America that you and I consider, when we talk on this podcast or when you and I are kibitzing about American political and cultural life, he said that America we're talking about was not born in 1776. It was born in 1965.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I actually quoted him today. We're talking about the Three Temptations and Matthew's version, and this idea of it really is, when you stop and think of why does a nation, in other words, when Satan shows Jesus all the kingdoms and their glory, nations and their glory, if you stop and think about what the average reader was thinking about, what nations and glory, pretty sure that, I would be happy to say that Satan's in charge of those things, right? Yeah.
Hey, look, Satan is just another oligarch to me. He's the original. He is the OG oligarch. We could call him that.
And Milton would be the one of the great narcissists of all.
Don't you think when Satan just says, "Bow to me and I'll give you these kingdoms"? Don't you just think of Musk jumping up and down on the stage at the rally?
It's a very good one. It's a very good, very good analogy. Yeah.
That was one of the great moments of the campaign too. Seeing Elon Musk just run out and jump up and down, almost gyrating. That was fantastic. I mean, these moments, the best moment of the campaign, in my humble estimation, was, and again, this isn't endorsing or glorifying this, but when Trump got shot, he just tells the Secret Service to stop, and he holds his hand up and says, "Fight." I'm surprised we didn't just coronate him right then and there. Like, no more elections. I mean, he was pierced for our transgressions. Maybe pierced for his own. I don't know. There's, I don't know. But
yeah.
So they talked. Stewart and Meacham talked about
the beast head was wounded, but he survived.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Trump's like, look, I don't like multiple heads, the beasts. I don't like it. I like. Yeah, I think there was this Jewish comedian, Eli Gold, I think, and he said he did it. I sent you this. He did this bit where he says he's doing Trump after he got shot. He's like, like so many people who were in the situation did like so much worse, so poorly. Like Kennedy just did so poorly, and I think Lincoln even worse. I mean, Lincoln just did so poorly as well. I mean, I did really. I mean, I did better than most people do in this situation. I really do. You can't do more beautifully. I mean, Reagan went down. I mean, he's hospitalized. There's no hospitalization. Okay, I wouldn't need anybody. I was fighting. I was pumping my fist like Hulk Hogan. Okay, Kennedy didn't pump. There was no pumping. Lincoln, look, we're in the Ford Theater. Okay, yeah.
Yeah, I saw that.
So that was the best. No, but that was it. But they Meacham said that he viewed. Stewart kind of said that this is, in a roundabout way, sort of said the last election seems like the Democratic circumventing of democracy, which then Meacham said, let me put a little note on this. Meacham said he saw the election results as the populist revolt or reaction against democracy, right?
Yeah.
That here's someone who, famously contested an election, wouldn't concede, and largely we know, right? I mean, these cases,
right?
Mostly by Republicans,
right?
Justice, some of whom Trump appointed, were thrown out. I mean, there was no election fraud. So there's this, the real sacrament, right? The secular sacrament we have, or one of them, is the peaceful transfer of power.
Yeah, and I guess we've become Zwinglian. I think the Republicans are Zwinglian on that one.
On a good day. On a good day.
In other words, we're only, if I win, it's right, and if I didn't win, I mean, and
then not just that, right? Then sort of embracing immunity, a degree of immunity that has not been in the past ever embraced or speculated on, and all this so that the refusal to concede, the authoritarian tendencies personality wise, the yearning for immunity, which, if you want to go back to our Motel 6 and SEAL Team 6, which we commented on back in the summertime, and our interpretation of the immunity decision, which you could go back and listen to, but all of this. And the voters said, we want to re-up. We want to re-up for this.
Well, I think what you saw in the campus protest is and it's been going on in many ways in certain, we did a couple of podcasts ago, we did the philosophical foundations of wokeism. And I think it's not honest to use woke the way a lot of the opponents do, but there is more than a few grains of truth in this idea of the anti-democratic spirit of what happened in a lot of traditional left-wing institutions, including universities and such. And so, in many ways, the election of Donald Trump is, I mean, who knows what right and left means anyway? But this is a different segment of the population rejecting democracy. You have democracy rejected in many circles. In progressive circles, and here's another example of it being rejected by a very different demographic.
Yeah, it's interesting because I have been called by folks on the progressive left, a liberal. People said,
Because
you're so liberal. You're such a liberal. And what they mean by this is outmoded, somebody that they'll call you a free speech absolutist or all these things, that old school liberalism,
right.
which would have been the foundation of the American experiment, right and left, right? You could be center right, center left, but everybody could agree on classical liberalism. Now, there might be a dispute as to how big a safety net we should have, how involved we should be in the world, these sorts of things. But basically, the foundations of the Enlightenment experiment, as embodied in constitutional republics with more or less free market economies, this has been being rejected on the left, which you're saying in some of the campus protests and the hardcore progressivism, and it's being rejected on the right in a form of nationalism, nativism, that a lot of people seem to be saying, hey, the Enlightenment's had a good run. Democracies had a good run. And Jon Stewart said something in that podcast that I completely identified with when he said, is democracy kind of an analog in a digital world, an analog system in a digital world? And it basically, is it that democracy and constitute that what we have, and he's using democracy as shorthand for, again, the constitutional republican system we have.
Right.
Is it able to respond with the urgency, with the agility, with the competency to the anxiety that voters feel, to the real lostness that voters feel, to the left behindness that voters feel, to the lack of control voters feel in their own lives? Is it so? And is Trump with the oligarchs? Is this the sort of thing that, well, he'll make something happen?
Just let us take it over. Yeah, and I think all those are. I mean, it's interesting that people in this country who overall are pretty. I mean, now they've conceded power to the very people that create the inequalities, right? So that's the irony of it, is the very people they say, please lead us now, are the folks who have benefited most from Reagan economics, or whatever you want to say, the technological boom or whatever. But it's interesting to me, some of the same, if you look at what I had some conversation with some really old order liberal folks, Jewish folks, who also very Zionist, and their daughters are all very educated, very, and up to October 7th would have said we're card-carrying liberals and progressives. But the kind of anti-Semitism they've experienced and the trauma of October 7th, they're very closely linked to Israel. There's a radicalization that's happened to them that's parallel to, you think of how the 9/11 bombers, where they came from. And again, I'm not making this a moral equivalency, but these people were kind of secular. They came from good homes, and the not fitting into the West radicalized them. And I see, where these young progressive women are now saying, I think our only home is in the Republican or in the right wing of Israeli politics. It's like the trauma, that's a real trauma that radicalized them. But I think what's radicalized so much of the populist movement that, say, supports Trump is a perceived trauma that, and maybe that's part of social media, that's part of the sense of grievance. If you stepped away and looked at your life, a lot of these people are in pretty good shape, and the people who are not in good shape are voting for people who help contribute to their situation. I mean, West Virginia is classic. I mean, West Virginia elected as a governor, now a senator, a guy who made millions of dollars polluting their drinking water. I mean, there are thousands of people that water were polluted by this guy. So, I mean, it's not about reality. But again, perception is reality, I guess. So, it is interesting, the radicalization. And I was reading Dodges Allen's book on temptation this weekend, and he says, nations exist for their own, they tell stories about themselves, about their own glory. And when they're in decline, or they're perceived to be in decline, then they become, their insecurity creates all kinds of sense of grievance. And what you end up with is scapegoating.
Oh yeah.
And then
This is
shortly thereafter, you get either revolution or a despot.
and a lot of deaths. This
A lot
is.
of people die. Yeah.
I've had Ed Watts on Give and Take a number of times, and he wrote a book called Mortal Republic, which is about the decline of the Roman Republic into an
Right.
autocracy. And this is his point. And he talks about make Rome again, like Mara, I guess, make Rome great again. Make MAGA, make Maraga. I guess you can really make it, but you can't really make an acronym.
Latin might be better. Do it in
Yeah,
Latin.
In Latin it would work. But he says, the problem with the make Rome great again, it's the problem with any restorationist political program. You have to find the people that screwed it up. And oftentimes you don't just scapegoat them, you get rid of the scapegoat. You quite literally scapegoat them in the sense that they got to get out of the camp, sometimes not alive. And
when Trump, the first version of Trump reminds me a lot of a typical, the typical Roman, the dictators prior to the emperors, but you could fall in and out of favor really quickly. Our last, the podcast we talked about that we think what you basically now, the Camden is like the whole court system, meaning medieval court.
Yeah.
Well, the trouble about that, I mean, it's interesting when you look at the great emperors who persecuted the church. Most of those people, except in the latter period, most of those people killed as many Romans, pagan Romans and senators and people in the court as they did Christians. I mean, I think at Domitian, everybody got killed when he was around. If you fell out of favor and so I think in Trump won, we had a lot of symbolic assassinations, a lot of symbolic cleansing. And, you look at who was in the inner circle, who's now, some of them are on the rhetorical hit list. It reminds you a lot, very much of, again, we know a lot more about the Roman, as so much has been written on that, but it's reminiscent at the very least.
Not Romanesque. Romanesque is a good thing, right? That's an art form that we generally think of as positive.
I like it. I like Romanesque art, and music.
So this is, it's interesting. Bill Maher, I just watched his new episode, and he's in the midst of the fires, and I mean, it was very interesting conversation.
By the way, we should, first of all, hearts break for the people.
Absolutely.
And also why we're making this podcast, there's a ceasefire that's gone into effect in Israel, and last I looked, 3 hostages have been released, and while that's going on, nobody in Gaza is dying. So I pray that this lasts more than 42 days.
42. That's 2 longer than Jesus was in the wilderness.
There we go. Yeah, I think it's 6 weeks or something like that. Yeah, 7 weeks.
So I mean, he was talking about, he was voicing his frustrations about, they were asking about certain things, and Newsom said, well, you got to look at the local people on the ground. And Bill Maher was like, yeah, I pay 13% of my income in taxes for these people to know this stuff and other things. And, Bill Maher was expressing a frustration that a lot of people, I think, feel that California pays the highest tax bracket in the country. And I'm not saying that, I'm not with Trump here. That's like, again, Newsom goes it's all Newsom stuff. But you feel the pain of, hey, can government handle this? Right? Is the California, state and local government, is this something they can handle? Right? And
could anybody handle a fire of that magnitude? Yeah.
Right.
I mean, one of the things you also have to ask in terms of, let's say the Jersey Shore, for instance, all these, or Florida. People want to live in these places that are not meant to have this many people living in them. That part of California, nature causes fires periodically. That's, however that happens, lightning or weather, there needs to be burn off in that area for there to be the natural recycling of things. And it's overpopulated, overbuilt. And also fires have been prevented from happening because people are living where they should be. Same thing when you do away, you build houses block to block on sandbars. You drain the wetlands because you want to put more building in, and then suddenly, they're either sinking or flooding or whatever. So there's a sense where the natural consequences of us ignoring really, I think common sense. I'm not even talking about natural preservation. I'm thinking, you build bunches of houses on the side of a mountain that's in a earthquake zone, and you prevent the burn off from natural. I mean, again, I'm sympathetic, but if you can't, some of these problems, if you go totally contrary to what should be done to manage things, it's like, okay, well, good grief, there's flooding on a sandbar in the Outer Bank. Or it's disappearing, right? Or the Jersey Shore, in terms of before you look at the old maps of the Jersey Shore before we talked about climate change, and there are roads and towns that don't exist that were here 80 years ago. So that's part of the problem. Can any of these things really be? I mean,
sure, and climate change is an issue, right? I mean, climate change is certainly an issue in inclement winters and then dryness after them and all these sorts of things that wind up creating conditions
more extreme. But the Santa Ana winds are the Santa Ana winds, right? And that area has only a certain amount of water, right? And so I think you're and frankly that that tax rate, given the history of tax rates, not that bad. And those Californians also pay more than Florida, the average Floridian, in terms of national. So California money goes to Florida when they
right. California pays. Yeah. Not only do they have the highest tax bracket in the country statewise, but they get back less.
Yeah, they get back dollars. Less. Yeah, Florida, Mississippi.
They subsidize the rest of the country. This is not a judgment. This is just the facts. The blue states subsidize the red states, right?
Absolutely.
That there's states all over. I mean, when you look at the big red electoral map, a lot of those states, the small government people that criticize people for being on the dole, are being subsidized by higher income states that get less back for their federal dollar.
Absolutely. What does where would Florida again? I mean, it's just the government needs to keep its hand off my Medicare, right? Off of my the government just keeps its hand off of my disaster relief funds. It's just anyway.
But yeah. So this is what I'm thinking about, this sort of sense of that Stuart said about does government just seem woefully inadequate to the existential threat that people feel, to the decline people feel, and expectation.
Yeah, people don't want to pay taxes and they want more services. So
hey, who doesn't? Who doesn't, Phil? This is like this is like the diet, the seafood diet, right? You see it and you eat it. You don't lose any weight, but you feel better. This is. But I think I was thinking about this yesterday, and I was thinking about Susan Neiman's book about evil, her history of evil, and it's a modern history of evil, which she bookends. She begins with the Lisbon earthquake, she ends. When's the Lisbon earthquake? Late 1400s.
It was right? Easter
or early 15. It's post Gutenberg. It's post Gutenberg.
It's early, isn't it? Easter 16 something.
Was it 17th century? I thought it was earlier than that. I thought it was.
Well, you know what? Al Gore gave us the internet, so we can look.
Here we go. Al Gore.
You go make your point while I look it up.
Phil is gonna find. Now I feel like I've got to fill time. All right, everybody. Scott's making a point. No, so what? We have the printing press. We have the capacity, just like, if Luther hadn't had the printing press, he would have been John Huss, right? I mean, he would have been
right.
Well, with the printing press and some German princes.
And some German princes, yeah. 1755, we both were wrong. 18th century. So it's the middle of the Enlightenment.
That's crazy. I thought it was. I thought it was pre-Enlightenment. No, okay, so but this is.
But it certainly fueled the Enlightenment, right?
We don't know anything. There you go. We know nothing. But her point, I think Neiman's point for bringing that up is it's not like there aren't other massive natural disasters. It's that everybody lived the Lisbon earthquake together. The capacity for news to spread so quickly, it was something so tragic and felt in such a widespread fashion that the collective grief, the collective angst, the collective where is God in this? She marks that as the beginning of natural evil, and then she bookends the other side with the Holocaust, the epitome in the 20th century of human evil, and she sort of looks at the nature of evil and modernity. But this is interesting to me, is the beginning of this modern anxiety in the Lisbon earthquake, and now, you know, the awful fires in California, right? For most of world history, a terrible fire like this, people disconnected to it wouldn't have been watching it all day, right? Wouldn't have been watching. We have the capacity to look at, to tune into.
There were exactly. Yeah.
To watch local news sources, to watch Instagram accounts, to watch, well, we used to be able to watch TikTok, but
Trump said he's going to save it.
I like my streaming platforms, not Chinese, okay? But you know, you have that. So I think that there's I don't think our psyche has evolved in a way that can handle all this mass trauma, right? That can handle trauma that's not your own trauma. You know, there's this great sense in the show Hannibal, and Hannibal, the guy who's, you know, the psychiatrist who's eating people, he's actually a pretty good therapist when he's not cannibalizing people, sometimes his own patients. And he's saying to one of his patients, there's no line in the room.
Is that crossing the boundary if you eat? I think you're not. I think that's
you're not allowed to eat. Yeah,
I think you're not allowed to eat your patient.
Can't date your patients, and you can't eat them.
You cannot eat them, right?
So he basically says, you know, that the fear response is meant for when the lion is right there. And he's like, there's no lion in the room. This is what anxiety is. It's the fear response without the lion in the room. And the chronically anxious nature of our culture is because there's so much fear response for things that aren't immediately prompting us, right? You're not immediately in danger, right? But you're feeling in danger. You're feeling that there's existential threats to you all the time. And then what do? I mean, we want so often we want government to do something, right?
That's also why we're so medicated, whether it be legally or self-medicating. No, I think you're there's a lot to that. I mean, you think of what people who witnessed the Armenian Holocaust, and then some of the various massacres after World War I, including the Greeks being killed by the Turks and Greeks then killing Turks and all that. And there was a State Department person who filed his report, saw the horrific, unspeakable atrocities that happened. I mean, I'm sorry, I'm remembering. I wish I didn't remember them. He filed his report and then killed himself. And there was a sense where I think, where you and I could, look at the killing fields of Khmer Rouge. We look at the bodies either after the October 7th massacre or what's happened in Gaza. There's a sense where, and then I also think the entertainment industry, the gore stuff. I think between, we keep being stimulated, we keep medicating ourselves, and now we've turned also gore into entertainment. And how could that not make a toxic cocktail that makes us want to, Daddy, tell me what I'm supposed to do? Let's make sure we get those people out of our country.
Right. Some form of rejection of democracy, right? And like you said, we've seen it in certain left-wing forums in the campus protests. We see it in the kind of the tribalism and the populism of the Trump movement and or the oligarchs, right? I mean, I have a friend who was very involved in space law and
law.
Yeah, he teaches a class on space law for engineers about, what are the rules in space? What are international rules in space? But he was saying that, Elon, NASA doesn't have the money to do all these.
Right.
They're just doing models, and Elon can just launch rockets in there. And this guy was celebrating. Look what Elon can do. And Elon can just shoot rockets and get real data and stuff. And so it looks, the oligarchs look like they can do something. And this is, oh gosh, the guy we talked about, JD Vance's mentor. We talked about him this summer. Gosh, his name is escaping me now. Zelen or whatever. It's Jewish. The guy that says we need a dictator.
We need a
he said we
dictator.
need a national CEO, which is just a dictator.
Right.
And he's saying how inefficient democracy is, right? And so you have this sense that, oh my gosh, this stuff doesn't work anymore.
Right.
This person is and you know, it's funny, Meacham brought it up that this is not new, that you could go back to Anne Morrow Lindbergh, who wrote a book back in the early 20th century, and she was saying that all the things, air power, all of these technological challenges, militarism, all these things, that really things going on in Berlin and Stalinist Russia and Italy were better suited to dealing with the evolving world we were finding ourselves in than London or the United States.
Well, and also it was part of the rationale of the Confederacy.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really was. There's a sense where, you know, the people cannot handle democracy. They need to be, it's not accidental that South Carolina started the Civil War, because that was where the worst guerrilla, I mean, the Revolutionary War was basically a brutal civil war there. And part of what came out of that was fewer people trying to control society. And it was, you know, again, it was it wasn't just about keeping, you know, treating African Americans if they were 3/5 humans and then not giving them any human rights. It was a general disdain of the common person and of democracy. So, I mean, that was one dimension of it. So I agree with you. I think it's and the trouble is, grieved, anxious people are, you know, those are not always the people, you know, let's say you have a business, okay? You probably don't want a grieved, anxious person being the face of your company.
Grieved, anxious people tend to be the cast of Real Housewives of Anywhere.
Right. So we are a nation of Real Housewives of America.
Yeah. So I mean, this one other thought I had as I was thinking through what we're going to talk about today was this sense that you really go with C.S. Lewis or Heidegger on human nature, right? Either human nature is basically a largely constant reality, right? This is why I say Paul Zoll would say science fiction is so great, because it's formed with a little bit of fashion. It's the same people, and you just do the window dressing of the technology and the outfits and stuff, but really it's just a different window on the same nature, and that largely that we're seeing the same nature reflected. So even when we're reading great literature, it's cross-cultural, but the ingredient is the same. Or Heidegger, which thinks being, you know, Dasein, human being, is this thing that's fluid and not fixed. I remember hearing a Heidegger scholar talk about the effects of terror on Dasein, on human being. An age of terror post September 11th in a culture like the United States, the different sort of human being that exists terrorized. And so I wonder, is human being, is there something different does it create a different sort of way of being in the world when, as we've said, you're bombarded with disasters and death and wars that you can't conceive of and totally understand and all these things, and you're just immersed in it? What does that do to what it means to be human? And is it a different way of being human than the vast majority of our, because we live in a world, if you live in late stage capitalism, late stage modernity, with all the technological and cultural achievement, you live in a world that's so radically different than the 99% of what our human ancestors lived in. Most people lived and died in the world of their grandparents or great grandparents without a lot of technological change. Most people don't travel a lot. That's why when people say, well, Jesus went to the Far East and learned yoga in India and all this stuff, I'm like, do you think a lot of people in a backwater of the Roman Empire were just saying, hey, what are you doing at 22? I'm going on a college trip out to India, you know, find myself. No, people didn't travel a lot.
Well,
most people were not cosmopolitan.
But what is a common factor is most people throughout history have been exposed to trauma, violence, and suffering. And,
yes.
And I think,
this would be the argument of eat, pray, love, right?
Yeah.
But that largely when this woman as a therapist is working with these boat people that have experienced all this trauma, they really she realizes their concerns are just pretty normal concerns, right? That their concerns are constant. She sees more of herself and her sort of late stage capitalists, more affluent clients in these refugees than she thought she would see.
Well, I think also there's a sense where I think of in a previous beginning of a dark age, what was one of the answers? Well, the answers was the courage of Christian monks who wanted to bring light into the darkness, and who were willing to show a lot of courage and a kind of discipline in the face of the brutality and terror and violence of people that in many ways, darkness and pain and violence and might was right. And few people had most of the resources. And if of a backdrop of late antiquity and the early dark or early Middle Ages, one of the responses to the breakdown of what had been was, we're going to help create a new world from the inside out. And I think there is still a very very much there's a very important work to be done, and there are
Yeah. And I was thinking as something that struck me yesterday was Richard Mouw's book, When the Kings Come Marching In, which is all about the apocalyptic texts in places like Isaiah. He does a lot with Isaiah 61. And here you've got this vision of the day of the Lord and healing, Tikkun Olam, the healing of creation. And what the hell are the ships of Tarshish doing in there? They're coming in. And these are, Israel's not a seafaring people. In fact, the ships of Tarshish are the instruments of their alienation and oppression, right? These are opponents. These are geopolitical opponents. And yet there's something about this beautiful ship that even the imperialist ship, God will claim the beauty of it and redeem it and bring it into the holy city. And so even in the midst of imperialism, struggle, democratic decline, that there are things that God is working in. There are stories, there are artifacts that through God's grace will find their way in to God's everlasting kingdom.
Amen.
Thanks, everybody. It's great to be with you, and we will see you post-inauguration. End stream. Trying to end the stream.
Did you freeze? Yeah.